Hello and welcome back. If you're here, you're probably either settling in for the night or you've already tried to sleep and your brain has other plans. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Tonight we're going to spend a couple of hours talking about The Simpsons, which, if you grew up in the 90s or the early 2000s, is basically talking about furniture. It's been there so long it's just part of the house. The Simpsons premiered on December 17th, 1989. It has now been running for 36 seasons and somewhere in the region of 788 episodes, which makes it the longest-running American animated series, the longest-running primetime sitcom, and the longest-running scripted primetime television show in the entire history of the medium. Those are the sorts of numbers that stop meaning anything after a while. 788. At some point, it just becomes a lot. More than you've watched. More than you'll ever watch, probably, unless you have a very specific sort of insomnia. And here's the thing about a show that's been running that long. You stop watching it the way you watch things. It becomes ambient. It becomes something that's just on in the background of your life. Playing in another room while you're doing something else. Or on a screen somewhere at a family member's house. Or cycling through on whatever streaming service you've got it stashed on. The Simpsons is, in a very real sense, the most watched show most people have never fully paid attention to. Which is where tonight comes in, because when you do pay attention, when you sit down with some of the stranger, more interesting theories that fans and writers and obsessives have developed over the years, you start noticing things, small things mostly, details that were always there but got swallowed by the laugh track or the gag or the pace of the episode. And some of those details, when you put them together, paint a picture that's considerably darker and more interesting than the cheerful yellow family on the DVD cover. I want to be clear that I'm not using darker in the way that people sometimes use it online, where everything has to be grim to be taken seriously. Some of what we're going to talk about tonight is genuinely sad in a quiet, recognizable way. Some of it is just fascinating, and a couple of these theories are the sort of thing where once you've heard them, you can't really unhear them. You start seeing them in episodes you've already watched a dozen times. A lot of shows don't hold up when you look at them this closely. Beloved shows, long-running shows, they fall apart if you push too hard on the internal logic. The internal logic doesn't hold, the characters are inconsistent, the world doesn't cohere. The Simpsons has its own continuity problems, certainly. We'll touch on a few of them tonight. But the characters at the center of the show were built with enough genuine psychological texture that they reward close reading. Matt Groening and the early writing team put something in there that was meant to last. You can feel it when you go looking. And the fact that the show has been running since 1989 means we have an extraordinary longitudinal record of these characters. Snapshot after snapshot of the same family, in the same house, in the same town, across 35 plus years of television. Nobody ages, nobody fundamentally changes, but the cumulative picture, the shape that emerges when you take all those episodes together, reveals patterns that individual episodes can hide. Patterns in how these characters cope with their lives. Patterns in what they avoid saying. Patterns in who they are when they think nobody's watching. Tonight we're going to go through 9 of those patterns. 9 theories about Homer, about Ned, about Lisa, about Bart, about Marge, about a man named Frank Grimes who showed up for one episode in 1997 and proved something the show had been hiding in plain sight, about a clown who might be a prophecy, about a baby who might be the most perceptive character in the entire run, and about why the show keeps appearing to predict the future. We'll take each one at a comfortable pace. There's no rush. If you find yourself drifting off somewhere in the middle, that's absolutely fine. Each section is its own thing, and you won't be missing a payoff at the end. There isn't really an end. That's sort of the point. If you're enjoying this kind of content and you want more of it, subscribing to the channel is a genuinely lovely thing to do. It keeps this going. There's also something particular about the sleep format that fits this show specifically. The Simpsons is a comfort watch for most people who grew up with it. It's familiar in a deep way. The theme music, the couch gag, the title card, all of it is preloaded in a part of the mind that doesn't require effort to access. It's already there. Which means that talking about it for a couple of hours has a quality that talking about less familiar material doesn't. You're not building something new in your head, you're enriching something that's already there. The theories we're going to discuss tonight aren't replacements for what you already know about the show. They're additions. They sit alongside the memory of watching it, not on top of it. That's a good way to fall asleep, actually, with something familiar that now has a little more texture to it. Right. Let's start with Homer Simpson, a crayon, and what might be one of the most quietly devastating decisions any character in this show ever made. Season 12, Episode 9. Homer aired January 7th, 2001. It's one of those episodes that gets cited in best of lists fairly often, usually in the context of emotionally resonant Simpsons. And if you've seen it, you know why. But I want to go through it slowly tonight because I think most people remember it as a sad episode about Homer briefly getting smarter and then going back to normal. And I don't think that's what it is. I think it's an episode about a man making an extraordinarily clear-eyed choice and then living with it, and hiding it from everyone, including himself. Here's the setup. Homer, during a routine medical examination, has an X-ray taken of his brain. The doctors cluster around the image looking confused. There's something in there, something sticking out of his right frontal lobe that shouldn't be. After some investigation, a few rotations of the scan, some increasingly baffled medical professionals, it becomes clear that the foreign object is a crayon that Homer jammed up his nose at approximately age 6 along with an entire 16-pack, sneezed out 15 of them, and simply never thought to check on the 16th. The crayon has been lodged in his brain for his entire adult life. The flashback the episode provides is worth sitting with. We see young Homer at age 6, cheerful and round, shoving crayons up his nose with evident enthusiasm. There's a sneeze, the crayons scatter, he counts them, 12, 13, 14, 15, and declares himself satisfied. Job done, and that's that. The 16th crayon remains, nestled against his frontal lobe, and Homer goes home to dinner, and 30 years pass. The thing the flashback does is establish that this wasn't Homer's fault in any meaningful sense. He was a child being a child. The crayon didn't get there through malice or stupidity. It got there through the specific, innocent chaos of being 6 years old and finding a packet of crayons irresistible. I mention this because it matters for how you read the decision at the end of the episode. Homer didn't choose to be intellectually limited. It happened to him. What he does later is make a choice with full knowledge of the consequences, which is different and considerably harder to dismiss. The doctors tell him that removing the crayon would either significantly increase his intelligence or kill him. And Homer, in a moment that actually tracks with his character if you think about it, he's brave in ways that get overlooked, decides to have the surgery. The crayon comes out. His IQ goes from 55 to 105. And what Homer does next is where the episode goes somewhere unexpected. Homer's first instinct, once the mental fog lifts, is to engage with the world as it actually is. He reads, he thinks carefully, he starts noticing things. And one of the things he notices, because his job is, after all, at a nuclear power plant, is that the plant is genuinely dangerous. Not in the comedic way the show usually handles it, where Homer sets things on fire and nothing consequential happens. Actually dangerous, systematically, documentably unsafe. So he writes a report, a detailed, comprehensive, damning safety report. He submits it to the appropriate regulatory bodies. The plant gets shut down. His colleagues, Homer's friends, Lenny, Carl, Barney, everyone from Moe's, lose their jobs. And they do not forgive him for it. There's a scene where Homer walks into Moe's and finds an effigy of himself burning in the middle of the bar. His best friends built it. They won't let him in. One of them says, roughly, that smart Homer is the worst thing that ever happened to them. This is the part that I think gets underplayed when people summarize this episode. Homer didn't just become smarter, he became someone who could see what was wrong and felt compelled to say so. And in Springfield, in a town built on ignoring what's wrong, on the collective social agreement that you don't look too hard at the plant or the corruption or the slow grinding despair underneath all the jokes, that made him an enemy. And this is telling when you think about it. The people Homer loves most in the world and the people outside his immediate family can only love him when he's not seeing clearly. When Homer is capable of genuine analytical engagement with the world, the friendships dissolve. Not out of spite, but because those friendships were built on a particular kind of comfortable shared blindness, and Homer has stopped being blind. He doesn't fit anymore. The one relationship that genuinely flourishes when Homer gets smarter is with Lisa. They read together. They have real conversations. Homer understands what she's saying, and more importantly, he understands why she's lonely. For a brief stretch of this episode, Lisa Simpson has a parent who is actually her intellectual peer, who can sit with her and discuss things at the level she's been aching for. It's genuinely lovely to watch, and it also makes what comes next considerably harder. There's a specific scene where Homer tries to explain his newfound understanding to Lisa using careful, adult language. And Lisa's face changes. She's not used to this. She doesn't quite know how to accept it, because accepting it means believing it might last, and she's been let down before. She keeps waiting for the joke. The punchline doesn't come. Homer is just being sincere and present and intelligent. And Lisa is cautiously, carefully allowing herself to feel, something she usually doesn't let herself feel around him. Then Homer decides to put the crayon back. He goes to Moe, who, in one of the show's better background gags, describes himself as an unlicensed surgeon and performs the reinsertion using a technique he calls the old Crayola oblongata, Daniel Sidian al Parker. And he wakes up from the procedure his old self again, dumb and warm and incapable of writing a safety report that gets anyone fired. The show could have left it there. A sad reset, the status quo restored. And then there's a detail buried near the end that changes the whole reading. Before the surgery, while he was still smart, Homer wrote Lisa a letter. He left it for her to find afterward. And in the letter, he tells her that he finally understands what it's like to be her. That he knows now how much it costs her to be the smartest person in every room she walks into. That he sees her, that he's proud of her in a way he couldn't articulate before, because the words weren't there. He also explains, as gently as he can, why he's choosing to go back. The letter doesn't spell it out baldly, but the implication is clear enough. Intelligent Homer cannot survive in Springfield, not because Springfield is cruel, though it has its moments, but because intelligent Homer sees too much and feels it too fully, and there is no version of that life that doesn't end in some kind of collapse. His friends won't have him, his job disappears, the world he knows dissolves, and so he makes the trade. He gives up the version of himself that Lisa could have known in exchange for the version that can stay. There's a detail in the episode worth noting here. Dr. Nick, the show's recurring joke doctor, the comedically incompetent physician who charges suspiciously low rates, is listed among the medical professionals Homer consults. The show puts Homer's most significant personal decision in the hands of its most ridiculous supporting character. And yet the decision itself is treated with complete seriousness. That tonal juggling act is something the show's best episodes do better than almost anything else on television. The container is absurd. The thing inside it is real. There's something in that which I find genuinely difficult to shake. It's not a tragedy in the operatic sense. Nobody dies. Homer bounces back, goes to work, eats a sandwich. But the letter exists. Lisa reads it and cries. And then life continues, and Homer can't remember writing it, and everything goes on. The theory, the reading of this episode that I keep coming back to, is that the crayon being put back isn't Homer giving up. It's Homer making a sacrifice. He knew clearly and fully what he was trading away. He just decided that the life he had, imperfect and limited and built on a kind of managed blindness, was worth more than the alternative. You can argue about whether he was right. I go back and forth on it, honestly. The right answer probably depends on what you think a life is for. If a life is for potential and achievement and becoming the fullest version of yourself, then Homer's choice was wrong and the episode is a tragedy. If a life is for the people you love and the community you belong to and the specific, irreplaceable texture of the ordinary days, then Homer's choice was something closer to wisdom. He just made sure to say goodbye first. And the reason I find that meaningful beyond the episode itself, beyond the cartoon, beyond the yellow family on the couch, is that it's not an unfamiliar kind of choice. The decision to stay somewhere, to remain someone, to trade the life you might have had for the life that the people around you can actually use. It's a very human kind of grief. The Simpsons put it in an episode about a crayon in 2001, and somehow that made it easier to look at directly. Now, talking about people making choices that look like resignation but are actually something else entirely. Let's talk about The Man Next Door. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Ned Flanders. There's another detail in HOMR that I don't think gets nearly enough attention, and that's the way the episode handles Homer's brief period of competence at work. When Homer gets the crayon out and his intelligence goes up, his first day back at the nuclear plant is genuinely startling. For him, for the audience, and evidently for the writers who constructed the sequence. He sees the plant for what it is. The safety violations aren't abstract. They're visible to him now in a way they weren't before. He notices the exposed wiring and the bypass protocols and the equipment running past its safe operational life. And he feels the weight of it. 30 Homer Simpsons have been in this building every day for years, and none of them, including this Homer, the previous Homer, noticed any of it. Or noticed and immediately forgot, which amounts to the same thing. The report he writes is described in the episode as comprehensive. 1,200 documented violations. The regulatory bodies receive it, and the plant is shut down. And the economic consequence ripples immediately through the community in a way that the show makes you feel. Lenny and Carl at the bar, out of work, not angry at the plant or at Burns, but at Homer, because Homer is the thing that changed. This is the part of the episode that functions as social commentary in the way the best Simpsons episodes managed to. The plant was always dangerous. The violations were always there. Homer's intelligence didn't create the problem. It just removed the mechanism by which the problem was being collectively ignored. And the community's response is to direct its anger not at the unsafe conditions, but at the person who made the unsafe conditions visible. That's a specific and recognizable dynamic, and the show handles it without underlining it. It's just what happens. Homer's report is accurate, and his friends lose their jobs, and the friendship dissolves, and the show trusts the audience to sit with the implications without having them spelled out. There's also a quiet resonance between this story and what we know of Homer's father. Grandpa Simpson is, across the show's run, depicted as someone who wasn't always the diminished, shuffling figure of the retirement home. He was a soldier, he had capabilities and a history. The show gives him flashback episodes that reveal a younger man with a specific shape to him, a man who made choices and lost things and ended up where he is. Homer's choice to put the crayon back is, in some ways, a choice to follow a trajectory the men in his family seem to follow. Of potential capped, of the fuller version deferred or forfeited. Whether that's destiny or choice, the show deliberately leaves open. But the letter exists, and Homer, who cannot remember writing it, sealed something true inside it before he let it go. One more layer to the crayon episode worth considering. What it says about memory. When Homer has the crayon reinserted and his intelligence drops back to its previous level, one of the things he loses is the detailed memory of the time he spent at higher intelligence. He doesn't remember the letter. He doesn't remember the conversations with Lisa. He doesn't remember writing the safety report or what it felt like to read a book and have it land fully in his mind. The decision to go back isn't something he has to live with the way a conscious choice usually works. He doesn't wake up every day aware of what he traded. The cost is sunk and the account is closed. You can read this as merciful. The show might intend it that way. Homer is spared the burden of knowing exactly what he gave up. But it also means that the sacrifice is asymmetric. Homer traded his potential for his family's stability and then lost access to the knowledge of having done so. The integrity of the choice, the full weight of it, exists only in the letter, only in Lisa's reading of it, only in the audience. And that's a particular kind of heroism, if you're willing to call it that. A sacrifice that the person who made it will never be able to take credit for because they can't remember making it. The letter is the proof, and the proof was written to someone else. There's something in that which feels specifically and honestly human, the choices we make that disappear into who we become afterward, the things we were that we can't access from the people we are now. I want to make a case tonight that Ned Flanders is the most psychologically damaged character in The Simpsons. Not the saddest, that's a different and more contested list, but the most damaged in the specific sense of a person whose entire personality is a structure built to contain something that has been trying to get out for decades. You know Ned, Okili Dokili, Neighborino. The pious, relentlessly cheerful man next door who has a better lawn, better values, a better body, and a kinder disposition than Homer by every measurable standard. The show uses him as contrast, as the thing Homer is supposed to feel vaguely inadequate against. He's the good neighbor, the good Christian, the good father. He has a house with a well-maintained bomb shelter. He runs the Leftorium, a shop selling left-handed merchandise that somehow stays solvent in a mid-sized American town, which either means the Springfield economy is unusual or Ned is a considerably better businessman than the show gives him credit for. He raised 2 boys on his own after his wife died, and Rod and Todd are, by any objective measure, extremely well-behaved children, which says something. And then in Season 8, Episode 8, Hurricane Nettie, which aired on December the 29th, 1996, something happens. A hurricane tears through Springfield and destroys the Flanders family home. Maude and the boys are safe, but the house is rubble. The town, moved by a surge of genuine communal goodwill, decides to rebuild it. They work through the night. They gather materials. They hammer things together. They put in real effort. And then Ned comes home and opens the front door. The house is catastrophic. Not maliciously, just incompetently. The wrong materials in the wrong places, structurally unsound, walls where there shouldn't be walls, and gaps where there should be floor. Someone has used newspapers as insulation. There are staircases that go nowhere. It's a disaster assembled with the best possible intentions by people who don't know what they're doing. And crucially, these are Ned's neighbors, his community, the people he has been unfailingly kind to for years. Ned stares at it, and he keeps it together. For a moment, he takes a breath. He starts to say something positive. And then it comes undone, quite suddenly and completely. He turns to the assembled crowd and goes through them one by one. Homer, lazy, selfish, a terrible neighbor, and a worse friend. Marge, she enables Homer, and always has. Bart, cruel in ways he's been allowed to get away with. Reverend Lovejoy, phoning it in spiritually. Principal Skinner, a bully with a diploma. He goes down the list and he is, and here's the thing, right about every single one of them. He's not ranting, he's diagnosing, he's listing specific, accurate grievances that he has clearly been cataloging for a very long time, and the hurricane just happened to open the door. Then he gets in his car, drives it directly through the iron gates of a mental institution, and checks himself in. He's done this before, apparently. The staff know him. The episode then takes us back into Ned's childhood via flashback, and this is where the actual theory lives. Ned's parents were 1960s beatniks, loving in their way but completely unable to discipline their child. Young Ned, shown as a genuinely disruptive, difficult kid, acting out in all the ways the show would later assign to Bart, ran wild. His parents, at their wits' end, took him to a Dr. Foster, a child psychologist who specialized in behavioral therapy. Dr. Foster subjected young Ned to 8 months of something the episode calls the University of Minnesota Spankological Protocol, which involved continuous intensive conditioning designed to completely eliminate his aggressive and disruptive impulses. 8 months. To put that in perspective, that's the better part of a year. That's a significant chunk of a small child's life spent in intensive behavioral correction. Whatever happened in those sessions, the result was permanent. It worked perfectly. Too perfectly. Ned came out of those 8 months so thoroughly conditioned that he couldn't express negative emotion at all. The verbal tics, okili dokili, diddly, the way his sentences trail off into nonsense before he finishes them, are, the episode reveals, the sound of a man trying not to complete thoughts he's not allowed to complete. Every neighborino is a sentence that stopped before it could become something else. Every cheerful wave at Homer across the fence is a behavior the protocol installed as a replacement for the thing Ned actually wanted to do. Dr. Foster himself appears in the episode to examine Ned, and his diagnosis is grim. The conditioning worked, but it was too comprehensive. Ned has no mechanism for processing or releasing the negative emotions that accumulate in normal adult life. He just packs them in tighter and tighter, and eventually, given sufficient provocation, a hurricane, a community that builds you a disaster while meaning well, the packing fails. Here's the detail that I find genuinely haunting about this. Ned has been living next door to Homer Simpson for the entire run of the show. Homer, who borrows things and doesn't return them, who destroys property, who is thoughtless and loud, and who has treated Ned with casual contempt for decades. Borrowing his ladder, taking his food, causing damage and never acknowledging it. And Ned has smiled and forgiven and turned the other cheek and said, "Okily dokily," every single time. Not because he's a saint, but because Dr. Foster built a cage and put Ned inside it when he was 6 years old. The particularly dark corner of this theory is what it implies about Ned's faith. The show presents Ned's Christianity as sincere, and the show mostly respects that sincerity. It's one of the things that distinguishes the characterization from easy mockery. Ned's faith is real, but when you add the conditioning backstory, you get a less simple picture. A man who was behaviorally reprogrammed to suppress negative expression found in adult life a belief system that explicitly values the suppression of negative expression. Turning the other cheek, forgiveness, patience with the difficult, the alignment is too neat to be entirely coincidental. Did Ned become a devout Christian because he genuinely encountered something transcendent? Possibly, but the conditioning also made him exactly the kind of person for whom a religion of radical forgiveness and emotional restraint would feel like home. The cage and the church reinforced each other, and neither of them ever let him finish a sentence. There's an additional detail in the Maud storyline worth noting carefully. Fans have pointed out across the years that Maud's behavior toward Ned carries some ambiguities the show never quite resolved. When the hurricane destroys their house, Maud isn't present during Ned's breakdown in any particularly supportive way. When Springfield is threatened by a comet in an earlier episode and Ned has a bomb shelter, he ends up pushed out of it, separated from his family, while the neighbors pile in. And after Maud's death in season 11, she's killed by a t-shirt cannon at a NASCAR race, which is one of those sentences that is simultaneously absurd and genuinely sad. Ned preserved her indentation in the mattress, but she was sleeping, the camera showed, facing away from him. I'm not saying Maud was a bad person or that the marriage was unhappy. The show didn't say that either, but the detail of the mattress, sleeping facing away from your husband for years and years, and the absence of her being preserved in the direction of that turn back, suggests something about that marriage that the show chose not to examine directly. Something quiet and long-standing that Ned would have been, given his conditioning, constitutionally unable to address. Hurricane Neddy is one of the most honest episodes The Simpsons ever made. Not because Ned's rage is validated, the show rushes to restore him to his cheerful baseline before the credits, because that's what the show does. But because for about 15 minutes, it lets a character who has been the butt of the jokes say what he actually thinks. And everything he says is accurate. Every criticism lands. The crowd doesn't argue with him. They just stand there looking uncomfortable while the cage comes open. Then they put him back in the cage at the end. Because that's what the show does. But the cage was real. And so was everything inside it. Since we're talking about people holding things in, there is a character in this show who has been doing that since she was 8 years old. And she's been doing it for 35 years of television. And the show has been documenting it more honestly than most people realize. One more thing worth tracking in the Ned storyline, and it's subtle. The way the show handles Ned's relationship with Homer over time. By the conventional reading, Ned is the better man. Kinder, more disciplined, more devout, less selfish. And the show supports this reading in almost every episode where they interact. Ned helps, Ned forgives, Ned extends generosity that Homer does not reciprocate and does not deserve. The gap between them is presented as comic, as the basis for a recurring joke about the limits of neighborly grace. But when you add the conditioning backstory, the dynamic becomes more uncomfortable, because the question it raises is, does Ned actually feel the way he acts, or is the goodness a behavior? Installed in childhood, maintained by long habit and religious reinforcement, existing independently of what's actually going on underneath? And if the latter, if Ned's kindness toward Homer is in some sense not freely given, but compulsively performed, then what does Homer mean to Ned? Not as a comic contrast, not as a test of faith, but as a person. Is there any version of their relationship that isn't built on Ned suppressing what he actually thinks of Homer in order to perform what Dr. Foster's protocol requires? The hurricane episode suggests there isn't. That what's underneath the performed goodness, when the performance finally breaks, is not love. It's an accurate and sustained inventory of grievances. The kindness was real in the sense that it was genuinely enacted and had real consequences for both of them. But it was also, in some sense, the cage doing its job. And here's the thing about Ned that I find genuinely moving once you see it this way. He keeps going back. He fixes the cage every time it comes open. He goes to therapy. He works on himself. He comes back and he's still Oakley Dokley. He's still the good neighbor. He's still offering Homer his ladder. The cage is not a prison in the sense of being inescapable. The door has come open more than once. Ned keeps choosing to go back inside, whether that's faith or conditioning or some combination of both that can't be separated anymore. I honestly don't know. But there's something genuinely poignant about a man who chooses over and over to be the person he was made to be, even knowing, as he revealed in that hurricane, what that choice cost him. The Rod and Todd question is also interesting here, because they're Ned's creation as much as they're his children. Rod and Todd Flanders are the show's most consistent argument that the Spankological protocol worked, or rather that Ned has replicated it. They're polite, they're devout, they're gentle, they're easily frightened by anything the secular world presents. They react to mild television content with distress. They don't understand conflict. They've been raised in an environment of radical kindness and strict faith, and the result is children who are, to the show's regular characters, essentially alien. They don't function in Springfield's social ecosystem. They don't know how. And Ned is proud of this, understandably from his perspective. He's raising his boys with the values he was given in the tradition he inherited. But when you add the conditioning backstory, there's an uncomfortable possibility that Ned is not consciously repeating the protocol that was applied to him, but that he's passing it on anyway. Not through a Dr. Foster, through a household atmosphere that systematically suppresses negative emotion, that models relentless cheerfulness as the appropriate response to difficulty, that presents faith as both value and mechanism for not finishing the thought. Rod and Todd are Ned's children. They're also possibly the next generation of the cage. The show is gentle about this. It never makes Ned a bad father. The love is real, the care is consistent, the attention is genuine. But the Hurricane Neddy reading gives Rod and Todd's strange otherworldliness a shadow of context. They're the children of someone who is made this way, being made this way by a loving man who doesn't quite know he's doing it. Season 1, Episode 6. Moaning Lisa. Aired February 11th, 1990. The show was barely a month old when it made this one, and by the standards of what you'd expect from a brand new primetime animated comedy, something expected to be broad and funny and safely watchable after dinner. Moaning Lisa is a remarkable thing to have aired so early. The episode is simple in structure. Lisa wakes up sad. Not upset about something specific, not reacting to an event. She just wakes up one morning and the world has a quality to it that makes it hard to get through. She plays her saxophone in the night. She drags herself to school and sits in gym class looking like a person who has been asked to run laps when they can barely see the point of walking. She can't explain it to her teacher, who sends her to the school counselor. She can't explain it to Marge, who initially responds by telling Lisa to smile, to perform okayness, to get the face right even if the inside isn't matching. She can't explain it to Homer, who doesn't really hear her. And here's the thing about that last point. Homer's failure to hear Lisa in this episode isn't the cartoon failure of a bumbling sitcom dad. It's a specific, recognizable kind of not hearing. He's present. He's sitting there. He's technically listening. But he's not equipped for what she's bringing him, and he doesn't know how to say so, and the result is a kind of well-meaning conversational void that leaves Lisa more alone than before she started talking. The person who helps is a jazz musician named Bleeding Gums Murphy, who she finds playing saxophone alone under a bridge at night. He doesn't try to fix anything. He doesn't ask her to explain or justify or perform recovery. He just plays with her. He tells her that the blues isn't about feeling bad. It's about feeling. And Lisa plays her sadness out on her saxophone. And for the first time in the episode, something releases. What Bleeding Gums gives Lisa is the thing that the rest of her world has failed to provide. Acknowledgement without condition. The acknowledgement that the feeling is real and valid, and doesn't require an explanation, and doesn't require being fixed. Therapists have a word for it, validation, and it sounds almost insultingly simple until you realize how rare it actually is. And the fact that Lisa has to find it at night under a bridge from a stranger playing jazz while her entire family is asleep says something about the household she lives in and the extent to which her interior life has been accommodated there. Marge eventually reverses her advice. "I was wrong," she tells Lisa. "You be yourself, whatever that means." That's the ending, not a cure, not a resolution, just a permission. Now, here's the theory. And it's less a theory and more an observation about something that's been running through the entire show for 35 years. Lisa Simpson is clinically depressed, not in the casual colloquial sense of she gets sad sometimes. In the persistent, characterological sense of a person whose relationship to her own interior life is shaped by an underlying condition that the show has never named, but has been remarkably consistent about depicting. The evidence accumulates slowly across the seasons, but once you start tracking it, it's hard to stop seeing. Moaning Lisa establishes the baseline. Inexplicable sadness, inability to explain it, a world that seems to ask her to perform wellness she doesn't feel. The show then revisits this with a regularity that doesn't feel coincidental. Season 9, Episode 17, Lisa the Simpson. Lisa becomes convinced she's going to lose her intelligence due to the Simpson gene, a hereditary condition of dimming. Her anxiety about this is profound and sustained across the episode in a way that goes beyond plot mechanics. She has a nightmare of being married to Ralph and being unintelligent with children. And the nightmare clearly draws on a real fear. Not of stupidity exactly, but of becoming someone whose inner life has been flattened. Someone who can't feel the thing she currently feels. That fear is the depression talking. The depression's particular terror, in Lisa's version of it, is not pain, but its opposite. The dimming of sensation, the prospect of a life that is merely tolerable rather than felt. Season 16's Sleeping with the Enemy shows Lisa developing what the show describes carefully as anxiety about her body. Anorexic ideation, essentially presented with more care and specificity than the show usually brought to sensitive subjects. The episode acknowledges in its final moments that this isn't resolved, that it will last, that it's the kind of thing you manage rather than cure. That's a remarkably honest note to end on. Season 23, Episode 22, Lisa Goes Gaga, which aired May 20th, 2012, and which was derided by critics at the time as a shallow celebrity vehicle. And fair enough, on the surface. Lady Gaga arrives in Springfield on a train and notices that Lisa is radiating the most profound unhappiness in the zip code, and spends the episode trying to help her. But look at what the episode is actually saying, that Lisa's sadness has been going on long enough and at sufficient depth that it's become, in some sense, a signal. Something that registers. Something that a person with real sensitivity can pick up from outside. That's the show acknowledging, in Season 23, what it established in Season 1. This is the same sadness. It hasn't been resolved. It's been there the whole time. And then there's Bleeding Gums Murphy's death. He dies in Season 6, Episode 22, Round Springfield, which aired May 7th, 1995. Lisa discovers he's in the hospital, tries to visit, arrives too late. He's gone. She's devastated in a way that seems disproportionate until you remember what he represented. The one adult outside her family who had taken her seriously, who had sat with her in her sadness rather than asking her to perform past it. Here's the detail that I always come back to when I think about this episode. Lisa uses her college fund, the money her family has been saving for her future, her escape from Springfield, to buy Bleeding Gums Murphy's only album from a pawn shop so that his music survives. She spends her future on preserving the memory of the one person who saw her. That's not grief. That's something older and heavier than grief. That's someone who has learned through repeated experience that the things that see them don't last. And so when they go, you do whatever it takes to keep a trace of them, even if what it costs is enormous, even if it means giving up something you desperately need. The floating timeline of the show complicates this in ways that are either depressing or profound, depending on how you look at it. Lisa is always 8. She never ages. Every year she sits in the same classroom, looks out at the same Springfield, is surrounded by the same noise. She never gets out. She never gets older. The intelligence that makes her extraordinary in this environment is also the thing that makes her situation most acutely painful. She can see exactly what her life is, and she can see exactly how limited the options are, and she is 8 years old forever. The future episodes are interesting here because the show seems aware of this and occasionally tries to give Lisa an out, narratively if not canonically. Lisa's wedding from Season 6 shows an adult Lisa who has escaped to London, who is accomplished and successful, and who is planning to marry a man her family can't quite understand, who still carries something careful and self-protective about the way she moves through the world. She's made it out. She still looks slightly like someone bracing for impact. Holidays of Future Past from Season 23 shows an older Lisa with a daughter and a career, who drives back to Springfield and looks at it with that specific expression the show has always given her, clear-eyed, slightly burdened, trying. The theory isn't that The Simpsons deliberately set out to write 35 years of clinical depression for an 8-year-old. I don't think that's how it works. It's more that they created a character with a genuine interior life, put her in a situation that would predictably produce sustained unhappiness, and then kept writing her honestly. And the cumulative picture of Lisa Simpson across all those episodes is one of the most sustained and honest portrayals of persistent low mood in American television history. And the reason it matters beyond the show is this. The episodes about Lisa's sadness are the ones that reach people who don't usually feel reached by television. The ones where fans write in and say, I saw myself in that. That's what it was like. I didn't have the words for it, and then a cartoon found the words for me. It's in a cartoon. She's yellow. Her hair is a star shape. And yet, before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Bart Simpson. There's a moment in Season 7's Summer of 4 Feet 2 that I keep coming back to when I think about Lisa's depression, even though the episode isn't explicitly about mental health at all. It's a beach episode, essentially. The family rents a beach house, and Lisa, tired of being the bookworm nobody likes, reinvents herself socially and briefly succeeds. She makes friends, she's fun, she's included. And then Bart exposes her real identity to her new friends, and she has to face the possibility that the friendship was conditional on the performance. The episode resolves warmly. Her new friends leave her a message on the beach that they like the real Lisa better anyway. But the thing I notice is what Lisa is doing in the middle section of the episode when she's performing the cool version of herself. She's not faking happiness exactly, she's experiencing a kind of relief. The relief of not being the smartest one, of not being responsible for knowing things nobody else wants to know, of just being a person among people for a few days. That relief is the shadow side of everything we talked about in the depression reading. Lisa's intelligence is her gift and her burden. It's the thing that makes her interesting and the thing that makes her isolated. And the episode shows her briefly putting it down, exhaling. And it's so clearly a good feeling that the return to herself, the real Lisa, the saxophone and the books and the facts about environmental degradation carries a genuine cost that the warm ending doesn't fully cancel out. The show doesn't make this explicit. It's not a Lisa is depressed episode. It's a beach episode, but the character it depicts is entirely consistent with the diagnosis. Someone for whom the ordinary social ease that other people take for granted requires effort and strategy, and sometimes the suppression of herself. Someone who has to choose regularly between being authentic and being included. And here's a smaller detail worth noting. Bleeding Gums Murphy, who Lisa meets in Moaning Lisa and who represents her first experience of being truly understood. She meets him under a bridge, alone, in the middle of the night. The show doesn't make this strange. Nobody asks why an 8-year-old is out alone at night. It's treated as just what happened. But the image of it is significant. The person who sees Lisa is found in darkness, outside, away from everyone, in a place nobody would think to look for help. That's not a hopeful image when you sit with it. It's a beautiful episode and a genuine relationship, and it matters enormously to Lisa. But the fact that she had to go looking alone in the dark to find someone who would take her seriously, that detail doesn't go away just because she found the person. The show kept Bleeding Gums alive for 6 seasons and then killed him. It kept the saxophone. It kept the sadness. It kept the search. And there's one more thing worth tracking in the Lisa depression reading, which is what the show does with her musicianship over the long run. Lisa's saxophone is her clearest route to the thing that Bleeding Gums showed her. That sadness has a form, that it can be turned into something that communicates. When Lisa plays, the show often uses the saxophone to carry the emotional weight that the dialogue can't quite reach. Season 2 and Season 3 have extended saxophone sequences that function, essentially, as the show's method for depicting Lisa's interior life directly, rather than through conversation or plot. Over the later seasons, the saxophone appears less. Lisa's musicianship becomes a character trait rather than an emotional vocabulary. She plays when the plot needs her to play, rather than playing because the show is using the music to access something the words can't. This is a small observation about production choices over a long run, but it rhymes with something else, the way Lisa's emotional life becomes more managed and less visible as the seasons progress. The early show is willing to sit with her sadness for extended sequences. The later show tends to resolve it in the allotted 22 minutes. The saxophone, which in the early run was the language of an unresolved emotional condition, gradually becomes a prop. What never changes is the condition itself. It's still there in the episodes that bother to look for it. The saxophone just stopped being the way the show told you it was there. Season 9, Episode 17, Lisa's Sax, aired October 19th, 1997. This one has been sitting in my head for a long time, and I think it's one of the most underappreciated episodes in the entire run of the show. It gets talked about as the episode that explains where Lisa's saxophone came from, which is accurate, but that framing buries what the episode is actually doing, which is explaining where Bart came from. The real subject of Lisa's sax is the creation of a character type. How a kid becomes the kid he becomes. The episode works through a flashback to 1990 when Bart is starting kindergarten and Lisa is a baby. And the Bart we see at the beginning of this flashback is someone worth paying attention to. He's 5 years old and genuinely excited. He asks good questions, he's curious about things, he draws with real enthusiasm and some evident natural talent. He's energetic and loud in the way that 5-year-olds are loud, but there's nothing in this Bart that reads as malicious or deliberately destructive. He wanders into his first day of school the way curious kids do, with the assumption that good things are ahead, that adults are probably trustworthy, that the world is a place worth engaging with. Then there's Miss Mellon, his kindergarten teacher. Within approximately the first week of school, Miss Mellon has categorized Bart. He's disruptive, he's difficult, he's not going to amount to much. She publicly ridicules a drawing he's done in front of the class. She tells him, in front of his classmates, with the casual cruelty of someone who has decided a child isn't worth the care it would take to choose words, that he's not going to college and frankly she doesn't care. He's 5. The episode doesn't dwell on this. It's a flashback, it moves quickly, and there are laughs around the edges of it. But if you watch the sequence carefully, there's a before and afters that is almost uncomfortably stark. Before Miss Mellon, a curious, engaged, enthusiastic kid. After Bart Simpson, the persona of the bad kid, already settling into place, the armor going on. Now, I want to be fair to the complexity here because the episode is genuinely layered. There are hints that Bart was already a handful before Miss Mellon. He's physically active, loud, resistant to sitting still. A different teacher might have found ways to work with that rather than against it. But the episode also makes clear that what Miss Mellon did was not manage a difficult child. It was dismiss one. There's a difference between a teacher who struggles with a challenging student and a teacher who tells a challenging student publicly at age 5 that she doesn't care about their future. The theory that this episode supports, or rather demonstrates, is that Bart didn't choose to be a troublemaker. He was assigned the role at 5 years old by an authority figure, and then he inhabited it, as children do because children are often more compliant with the identities adults give them than adults are comfortable admitting. The bad kid performance that Bart maintains across 700-odd episodes of television has its origin in a woman who decided in 1990 that he wasn't worth investing in. What makes this particularly interesting is the other half of the episode. At the same point in time, the same stretch of weeks, Marge and Homer realize that Lisa is showing signs of what might be unusual emotional and intellectual sensitivity. She's a baby technically, but she's expressing herself in ways that concern them. She's too sad. The sadness seems too big for a toddler. Dr. Hibbert, their family physician, advises that she might benefit from an enrichment activity, something that gives her a channel for what she's feeling. But the family has money for exactly one thing. They can't afford 2 children with enrichment activities. And in the episode's pivotal scene, Homer and Marge are in the kitchen discussing this, which child to invest in, and Bart is in the hallway, listening. He hears the whole conversation. He hears his parents deciding, through no malice whatsoever, through sheer economic constraint, that Lisa is the one, that her need is more immediate and her talent more visible. And he doesn't cry or protest or make it about himself. He walks in from the hallway and essentially volunteers. He supports the decision. He tells them it's fine. He's 5 years old and he already knows he's the one being let go. And then the money goes toward a saxophone for Lisa, and that saxophone changes her life. And Bart goes back to being the difficult one, the bad one, the one Miss Mellon already knew wasn't going anywhere. There's a beautiful detail in the episode's final beat. The flashback resolves, and we're back in the present. And the present-day Bart, 10 years old, 5 years of bad kid performance behind him, finds out that the saxophone Lisa loves was bought for her partly because of a financial decision that involved him. His immediate response is to claim credit for Lisa's music, to say cheerfully that he gave Lisa her gift. And the show lets him have this. It's played for a laugh, but underneath the laugh is something quite touching. A boy who was left behind finding a way to feel like part of the story anyway. Now, in fairness, the show also gives Bart moments of genuine talent throughout its run that complicate any easy reading of him as simply written off. He's a skilled skateboarder, which requires real physical intelligence and fearlessness. He demonstrates natural leadership in certain contexts. When he leads a group of kids, he's often effective and even inspired. He's a good liar, which is its own kind of intelligence. There are multiple episodes where Bart shows artistic ability that goes back to that early drawing. He learns chemistry in one episode and demonstrates genuine aptitude. He's not unintelligent, he's disengaged, and there's a meaningful difference between those two things. But the show has also been consistent about the source of the disengagement. It's not a mystery. It's not a personality type he was born with. Lisa Sachs put the receipt on the table in season 9 and said, "Here is exactly when this happened, and here is exactly why." There's a version of Bart Simpson that Miss Mellon didn't get to first. The show gave us a glimpse of him in 1997, a 5-year-old with a crayon and a genuine question about the world. And then it showed us what happened to him. And there's something about that, about the specificity of it, the particular woman in the particular classroom, the particular moment of public humiliation at the particular age when children are most susceptible to believing what adults tell them about who they are. That makes it feel more true than a lot of things the show has done. Bart is the performance of a boy who was told he was nothing before he had time to be something. And the performance is so good and so sustained that most people watching, including sometimes Bart himself, have stopped asking what's underneath it. But talking a bit about characters who lost something early and spent decades performing around the gap, there's another one, and hers is considerably harder to see because the show asks you to mistake her competence for contentment. Let me come back to something about Bart that Lisa Sachs doesn't quite address, and that a few later episodes approach from different angles. If Bart's bad kid identity was assigned by Miss Mellon, it was also at various points offered an exit. And Bart consistently didn't take it. That's worth thinking about because it complicates the damaged by circumstances reading in a way that makes it more honest. There are episodes where Bart is offered genuine mentorship, genuine investment from an adult who sees something in him. Season 3, Episode 5, Homer Defined glances at it. Season 4, Episode 7, Bart Sells His Soul shows a Bart capable of genuine depth and genuine feeling. In Season 8, Episode 1, Treehouse of Horror 7. In a canonical episode, Bart Sells His Soul gets revisited thematically in the sense that Bart's interior life is shown to have real texture. He knows what a soul is. He knows what losing it means. He gets it back. The theory that I find most interesting, which builds on the Miss Mellon reading but doesn't let Bart off the hook entirely, is that at some point the bad kid performance stopped being something Bart was forced into and became something he chose. Not because he likes being bad, but because the performance is familiar and the exit is frightening. The thing Miss Mellon did was give Bart an identity before he could choose one, but what he's been doing ever since is choosing to keep it. That's a harder thing to feel sympathy for, and the show knows it. Bart is genuinely cruel sometimes. The episodes that track his worst behavior, the ways he torments Milhouse, the casual thoughtlessness toward people he doesn't regard as his concern, aren't just the show being edgy. They're the show documenting what happens when someone builds a persona of deliberate transgression and then lives inside it long enough that it stops being a persona. The Miss Mellon reading doesn't excuse any of this. It explains the origin. What Bart does with the origin is still his responsibility. And the show has been at its best honest about both of those things simultaneously. There's a line in Lisa Sachs, delivered by Bart after Homer and Marge's discussion about which child to invest in. That's played as a joke, but lands differently if you're paying attention. Bart says, essentially, "Yeah, get the thing for Lisa, she needs it." And he says it cheerfully, immediately, without any visible resentment. He just knows. He's 5 and he already knows how this goes. That's not a boy who was crushed by circumstance. That's a boy who had already learned to accept it, which is in some ways a sadder thing to watch. Here's a fun detail from a different angle on the Bart story. In Season 10, Episode 23, 30 Minutes Over Tokyo, and several other episodes across the run, we see Bart in situations that require genuine competence, and he delivers it. He navigates social situations with strategic acuity. He reads people accurately. He knows who can be moved and how. These are skills, real, useful skills, that would serve him well in a dozen professional contexts if anyone were paying attention to them as skills rather than as attributes of the troublemaking kid. There's a consistent pattern to what happens when kids get labeled early as problems in school. They tend to develop the exact social and relational intelligence that school doesn't value, because surviving in that environment requires reading people quickly, figuring out who will give you room and who won't, understanding the real rules rather than the stated ones. Bart essentially became a social genius by being treated as a social problem. That's an interesting thing to sit with. The process that labeled him worthless produced, as a byproduct, a set of genuine capabilities. The show knows this. It's the reason episodes that put Bart in genuine leadership situations, where his ability to read a room and improvise and persuade actually matters, tend to produce some of the show's most satisfying Bart moments. He just never got credit for it as intelligence, because the cage Miss Mellon built was labeled a different way. Let me say something that I think is true and that the show dances around without ever quite stating directly. Marge Simpson is a person of significant talent and considerable intelligence who, at some point in her late teens, made a choice. Partly by circumstance, partly by disposition, partly by the specific social gravity of Springfield, to put almost all of that into a family. And the show, across its run, keeps leaving evidence of what she might have been if that hadn't happened. It's not the main story. It's never the main story. But it's there, in the background of almost every room she's in. Start with the hair, the blue tower. It's been that way since she was a girl, apparently. It's impractical and extraordinary and completely her own. In a show where almost every character is visually defined by their role. Homer in his white shirt, Bart in his red, Lisa in her red dress. Marge's hair is the one genuinely singular visual element. It doesn't match anything. It doesn't serve a function. It's just hers. And it's magnificent in a completely unself-conscious way, which is its own kind of statement. Here is a woman who has turned her domestic competence into an art form and given most of herself to other people's needs. And she walks around with something on her head that is spectacular and completely unjustified and entirely her own. Nobody in Springfield ever remarks on it. That's the strangest detail when you think about it. In a town that comments freely on everything, nobody finds the blue tower worth mentioning. The art is the other thread. Marge paints throughout the series. She's good, not in the way the show plays for laughs. There are episodes where her painting causes social complications because it's too good, too honest, too revealing. In Season 3, she paints a portrait of Mr. Burns that he commissions more work from, eventually wanting to be painted in a more vulnerable and intimate way. Her paintings have a directness to them that the show treats as mildly problematic. She captures people as they actually are rather than as they'd like to be seen. That's a particular kind of artistic gift, and it's also, in Springfield, a social liability. She sculpts. She wrote a romance novel in Season 15, Diatribe of a Mad Housewife, which aired January 25th, 2004. The novel's hero is unmistakably Ned Flanders, or rather an idealized figure with Ned's qualities. Now, the Ned thing. I want to be careful with this because the easy reading is Marge secretly wants Ned, and I don't think that's what the show is doing. The more interesting reading is that the man Marge imagines as the romantic ideal is a man who is present, who listens, who is consistent, and gentle and who shows up. And Homer, for all his genuine love, and the love is real, the show is consistent about this, is not reliably those things. He's grand gesture Homer, and then he's absent Homer. He's, I'm going to spend the family savings on something impulsive, Homer. The novel isn't an affair fantasy. It's a portrait of what Marge has needed and not reliably received. Season 6, Episode 11, Fear of Flying. Aired December 18th, 1994. Marge cannot board a plane. It's not a mild discomfort. It's a full, debilitating fear that has been there since childhood. The episode traces it to her father, who Marge believed for years was a flight attendant, a fact which turns out to have been a carefully maintained secret. He was actually a steward, a word that carried different social weight in the era, and her mother constructed an elaborate cover story to protect the family from embarrassment. Here's what I find genuinely fascinating about that. Marge grew up in a household where the family story and the version of things they presented to the world was maintained with considerable effort over what was actually happening. Her father performed a role. Her mother managed the narrative. The surface was kept smooth at the cost of what was underneath being unspoken. That template is exactly how Marge approaches her own life. The carefully maintained surface. The family story told well and told consistently. The gap between what's presented and what's underneath. The paintings, the novel, the gambling, the things that briefly give her something purely her own. There's the gambling, briefly. Season 5, Episode 10, Homer versus Patty and Selma. Marge develops a gambling problem at the casino, and the episode treats it as a one-off plot device. But as a character moment, it's striking. A woman with almost no personal agency or autonomy suddenly discovering something that gives her risk and consequence and stakes and is completely her own. She's not doing it for her family. She's not managing anything. She's doing it because the adrenaline is hers. What connects these things, the art, the novel, the gambling, the fear of flying, the blue hair, is that each one of them is Marge being purely herself rather than being Marge in relation to someone else. The show gives her these fragments and then takes them back, episode by episode, returning her to the role of wife and mother and domestic competence. The status quo is the show's gravitational constant, but the fragments accumulate. There's something else worth noting about how Marge's competence works in the show. She manages the entire domestic infrastructure of a 4-person household, sometimes 5 when Grandpa visits, on what should be an insufficient budget. Homer's salary as a nuclear safety inspector, given his demonstrated spending habits and the size of the house and the car and the lifestyle, should not stretch to cover everything it apparently covers. And yet it does, because Marge is doing something with money and logistics and organization that the show has never examined directly. Because examining it directly would require acknowledging that she is working extraordinarily hard at something she didn't choose so much as find herself in. There's also the matter of Marge's ambitions before Homer. The flashback episodes, particularly The Way We Was from Season 2, which covers how Homer and Marge met in high school, show a young Marge who was engaged with the world. She was interested in feminism. She had opinions about things beyond the domestic. She was the kind of 17-year-old who reads and thinks and has something to say. Homer fell for this version of her. And the show suggests gently that what happened next wasn't quite what either of them planned. A pregnancy, a wedding, a life in Springfield, the gradual narrowing of possibility that comes with each new responsibility. The theory isn't that Marge is unhappy. I don't think that's right. It's that Marge is someone for whom happiness and fulfillment are not the same thing. And the show keeps reminding us of this without ever resolving it. The paintings in the background, the novel she wrote and her family barely read, the blue hair that nobody in Springfield has ever remarked on as extraordinary because they've all stopped seeing it. A woman who could have been something quite specific and unusual, who chose instead to be the thing her family needed, and who paints in the spare hours because the creative impulse didn't go away just because it stopped being the main thing. There's a particular kind of quiet grief in that. Not dramatic grief, not crisis grief, just the low, persistent awareness of a road not taken, humming underneath the competence and the casseroles and the tower of blue. Now, let's talk about the show trying something genuinely unusual in Season 8. An experiment that seems like a comedy, but is actually a philosophical argument about what the show itself is. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Frank Grimes, there's an episode from Season 1, Life on the Fast Lane, aired March 18th, 1990, where Homer gives Marge a bowling ball for her birthday. It's engraved with his name. It's clearly for him. He thought about what he wanted and then wrapped it and gave it to her. The episode is remembered as a story about Marge briefly developing feelings for a bowling instructor and Homer recognizing what he almost lost. And that's what it is. But the setup, the bowling ball getårint, is the show establishing in its very first season what Marge's marriage actually costs her on a daily basis. Homer's selfishness is the first fact. His eventual recognition of what he risked is the emotional resolution. But the bowling ball is where the episode begins, and it's not the last time the show will use a birthday present as a measurement of how much Homer actually sees his wife. Season 5, Episode 10, Homer versus Patty and Selma. Homer gives her what amounts to nothing of consequence. Season 7, Episode 8, Mother Simpson. Homer is so absorbed in his own emotional arc that Marge's needs vanish almost completely from the episode. She's there, she's supportive, and she disappears into the wallpaper of Homer's story. There's also the Marge's sisters issue. Patty and Selma Bouvier are, by almost any objective measure, awful to Homer. They mock him, diminish him, treat him with undisguised contempt. And Marge maintains the relationship, manages the tension, smooths things over, has them to dinner. This is usually presented as Marge being a good sister, which it is. But it's also Marge doing the labor, the relationship labor, the management of difficult personalities, the holding of competing demands, that she does in every corner of her life. She's the shock absorber, the thing that keeps everything from touching each other too hard. A person who is the shock absorber for everyone around them is also, by definition, absorbing a lot of shock. The show shows Marge being good at this. It rarely shows what it costs. The blue hair is still the thing I come back to. The extraordinary, impractical, completely unnecessary blue tower that she has had since girlhood, in a family where everything else is functional. It's the one thing about Marge that was never explained, never made sensible, never made useful. It just is. It's been there since the beginning, unexplained and conspicuous, and it will still be there at the end. I think that's the most honest thing the show ever said about her. And here's the detail about Marge's family history that I think changes the reading of all of this slightly. Marge grew up in a household with Patty and Selma, her two sisters, who are, as depictions of repressed, unlived lives go, considerably more overt. They smoke constantly. They take jobs at the DMV. They are hostile to men in a way that seems to have a history behind it rather than just a disposition. They make fun of Homer with a consistency that goes well past preference and into something structural. And they love Marge in the specific way that siblings love the one among them who got out, which is to say, with genuine affection and also with the particular edge of people who stayed and are watching someone else's version of the dream. Marge's mother, Jacqueline Bouvier, is a cooler, more controlled version of the management that Marge performs daily. She kept the family together. She maintained the surfaces. She raised 3 daughters, and the most successful one, by conventional metrics, is Marge, who has a husband and children and a house and a life in Springfield that her mother presumably regards as a good outcome. What all of this family context does is give Marge's specific shape a genealogy. The management, the surface maintenance, the creative impulse subordinated to domestic function, these aren't things Marge invented. They're patterns she inherited from a household that ran on similar principles. The blue hair is, in this reading, not just Marge's individual strangeness. It's the one thing in her family line that didn't get passed down, the singular thing that was just hers. That didn't come from her mother and won't go to her children. That might be the most hopeful thing about it. Season 8, Episode 23, Homer's Enemy, aired May 4th, 1997. I'll tell you what I think this episode is doing, and then I'll work back to the evidence because the conclusion is easier to track once you know where we're going. Homer's Enemy is not a comedy about an uptight man who can't accept Homer's good fortune. It's a philosophical argument delivered through the format of a sitcom episode under cover of laughs about the nature of the world the show inhabits. Frank Grimes is the only character in the history of The Simpsons who lives in the actual real world, and the actual real world kills him. The show opens with a news segment about Frank Grimes, described as an American hero, a man who was abandoned by his parents at age 4, worked menial jobs from childhood to pay for his own education, survived a silo explosion that put him in hospital for years, and emerged from that hospital to put himself through night school and earn a degree in nuclear physics. He got there through suffering and discipline and sustained, unglamorous effort. He earned everything he has. Every qualification was fought for. Every opportunity was built from scratch. He is, by the logic of the meritocracy that most people in his world believe they live in, someone who deserves good things. He is assigned to Homer's sector at the Springfield nuclear power plant. Now, the show by season 8 has established Homer's biography in considerable detail. He went to space, season 5, Deep Space Homer. He was briefly the personal assistant to a Bond villain named Hank Scorpio, who, in passing, gave him the Dallas Cowboys as a gift. He was in a Grammy-winning barbershop quartet called the B Sharps. He once managed a country music singer. He had dinner with Gerald Ford. He has a house, a boat, a devoted wife, 3 children, a dog and a cat, a bowling team, and a recurring spot at Moe's. He holds a job at a nuclear plant that he has documented in multiple episodes and official plant records as almost catastrophically unqualified for. Frank Grimes sees all of this and it doesn't compute. He makes his arguments to the people around him clearly and rationally. Look at Homer's life. Look at what he's achieved without trying. Look at what I've achieved through trying. How is this man, this particular man with this particular documented record, rewarded so richly? The people around Frank don't understand the question. They're not being obtuse or defensive. They genuinely can't hear what he's asking. Because what he's asking is, why don't cause and effect work here? And in Springfield, they don't. Not reliably, not for Frank's purposes. Homer, in the episode, is not being cruel to Frank. He's being Homer. He tries to befriend Frank, invites him to dinner, takes him on as a project. The cruelty is structural. It's the cruelty of a universe that makes Homer's life pleasant and makes Frank's effort meaningless, not through malice, but through the deep indifference of a system that simply doesn't run on merit. The episode's central set piece is a children's nuclear power plant design contest. Homer, as a joke, without understanding that it's a contest or really engaging with the mechanics of it at all, submits a crayon drawing. Frank submits a technically sophisticated, professionally rendered design. Homer wins. The judges find his design whimsical. Frank is passed over, and here's where the writers do something quite precise. Frank's reaction to losing the contest to a crayon drawing is not disproportionate when you think about it carefully. It's exactly proportionate. What Frank is experiencing is not losing a competition. He's experiencing the final proof that the world he thought he lived in, the meritocracy he structured his entire life around, does not actually exist. The evidence was always there, but the contest is where it becomes undeniable. The writers of the show have said in interviews that Frank Grimes was conceived as a realistic character, a person who would respond to Homer the way a real person would respond to Homer. David Silverman, who directed the episode, described it as an experiment in what happens when you put someone real into the show. And the experiment ends with his death, which is the show's answer to its own question. Realistic people don't survive in Springfield. Frank eventually has a breakdown in the plant. He starts imitating Homer's behavior, eating food off desks, being careless, goofing around, shouting that if Homer can do this and succeed, so can he. He grabs 2 large electric cables. Homer would survive this because Homer always survives. Frank Grimes is not Homer. He doesn't have Homer's particular relationship with consequence. Frank Grimes dies. His funeral is the episode's final scene, and it's genuinely bleak in a way the show doesn't usually commit to. Homer, who has fallen asleep at the service, talks in his sleep, says something that functions as a punchline. The crowd laughs. Life in Springfield continues. Note what doesn't happen. Nobody learns anything. Nobody pauses. Nobody says, he had a point. The show does not offer even a small corrective. Frank Grimes died because he expected the world to be fair, and it wasn't. And Springfield mourns him the way it mourns everything. Briefly, inconclusively, and then moves on. Here is what this episode demonstrates. Springfield runs on rules that are not the rules of the real world. We talked about this with Ned. The cage always closes, the status quo reasserts itself because that's the contract the show makes with its audience. But Homer's enemy makes that contract explicit in a way it never usually does. Homer is fine because the story needs Homer to be fine. That is the rule. It is not a moral rule. It is a narrative one. Frank Grimes didn't know this rule. He was a guest character in a show built to protect its protagonist. And so he treated Homer's world the way you'd treat the real world, as a place where actions have consequences, where incompetence leads to failure, where the universe has some relationship to fairness. That expectation killed him. The deeper implication, the one I keep turning over, is what this says about every other character in Springfield. Ned Flanders, who we discussed earlier, has found a way to live in Springfield without expecting it to be fair. His mechanism is faith. Marge manages it through competence and domesticity and a very deliberate narrowing of her own expectations. Burns manages it through power and insulation. He creates the unfairness rather than being subject to it. Lisa manages it through the hope of eventually leaving. They've all, in their various ways, adapted to the show's rules. They've stopped expecting cause and effect to behave normally. They've built personalities and coping strategies around the specific shape of the place they live in. Frank Grimes hadn't. He arrived with everything intact: work ethic, discipline, ambition, the reasonable expectation that the world rewards effort. And Springfield ate him alive. The reason Homer's enemy makes people uncomfortable in a way that most Simpsons episodes don't is because Frank Grimes is right about everything. The crowd at his funeral knows it. Homer knows it on some level, in the way Homer knows most things. Dimly, glancingly, with insufficient force to change anything. And the show knows it, and the laugh track keeps going anyway. That's the argument the episode is making, quietly and without resolution. That the laugh track keeping going is part of the argument too. There's a secondary argument that Homer's enemy makes almost accidentally, which I think is worth tracking carefully. The episode shows us Bart. While the main narrative follows Frank Grimes' slow destruction at the plant, a subplot follows Bart purchasing a dilapidated factory for $1 and renovating it with the help of some friends. By the episode's end, Bart's factory is a thriving little operation. A 10-year-old with no credentials, no work history, no qualifications, has outperformed a disciplined adult who spent decades earning everything he has. The joke structurally is that the universe rewards Bart the way it rewards Homer, randomly, excessively, without regard to merit. The Simpsons family operates by different rules than Frank Grimes, and those rules extend even to the children. Bart's success isn't explained or justified by the episode, it just happens, in parallel to Grimes' failure, which is the point. But there's an uncomfortable extension of this logic. If Springfield runs on Simpsons rules, if the family is protected by narrative gravity in a way that other characters aren't, then the question of what Frank Grimes deserved is actually the wrong question. In Springfield, merit isn't the currency. something else is. And the thing the Simpsons family has that Frank Grimes lacks isn't intelligence or virtue or even luck exactly, it's narrative centrality. It's being the story's protagonists. Frank Grimes died because he was a guest character, not metaphorically, literally. The show couldn't protect him the way it protects Homer because he wasn't built to be protected. He was built to reveal something and then exit. And the show knows this. The writers know this. That's what makes the episode so disquieting. It's a piece of television that is, on some level, aware of its own machinery. It's using the logic of the show as the source of the horror. Frank Grimes is destroyed not by Springfield's corruption or by Homer's carelessness, but by the structural rules of narrative comedy. He's a realistic person in an unrealistic world, and the mismatch is fatal. The episode was written by John Swartzwelder, who is widely considered one of the show's greatest writers. He wrote over 60 episodes across the show's run. Homer's Enemy is often cited as his masterpiece, which is a strange thing to say about an episode this bleak, but it's accurate. And the bleakness is what makes it a masterpiece. It's the show looking at itself with clear eyes and saying, here is what we are, here's what that means, and here's who gets hurt by it. Not a comfortable episode to sit with, not meant to be. There's a question the Frank Grimes episode raises that I don't think has a clean answer, and I want to leave it with you rather than pretend it does. Is Homer good? Not, is Homer a good character? He obviously is, the show wouldn't work without him. Seasons of evidence support the case. But is Homer, the person in the world the show depicts, a good man? The show answers this affirmatively, consistently, and with emotional sincerity. Homer loves his family. Homer's failures are failures of capability and attention rather than intention. Homer grows occasionally in the ways that people grow, slowly, imperfectly, with regressions and setbacks. The love that runs through the show is genuine, and it runs through Homer. But Frank Grimes' case complicates this, because Homer's good fortune doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists against Frank Grimes' suffering. Homer's career protection, his immunity from consequence, his ability to fail upward over and over without lasting damage. All of that is happening in a context where Frank Grimes is working every day for everything Homer was just handed. Homer's luck isn't neutral. It has a cost, and Frank Grimes paid part of it. The show doesn't make Homer responsible for Frank Grimes' misfortune in any legal or moral sense. Homer didn't cause the silo explosion or the abandonment or the years of struggle. He didn't create the unfair system. He just benefited from it, which is a different thing. But just benefiting from a system that produces Frank Grimes's is its own kind of moral position. The episode is honest enough to show us this without resolving it. Homer is good. The world that made Homer's goodness easy is also the world that made Frank Grimes's goodness cost everything. Both things are true. The show leaves them sitting next to each other. Now let's talk about something a bit more specific and a bit more fun in a melancholy sort of way. Krusty the Clown is not a side character. He appears throughout the run of the show as Bart's idol, the television personality Bart is devoted to in the way that children are devoted to things that feel like they're speaking directly to them. He's the figure Bart organized his childhood around, the source of his taste in entertainment, his sense of humor, his basic cultural orientation. Krusty is to Bart what Bleeding Gums Murphy is to Lisa, except Bleeding Gums was genuinely trying to help her, and Krusty is mostly just trying to survive his own career. The theory I want to walk through tonight is that this devotion makes sense on a level the show never makes explicit, because Krusty is Bart, or rather Krusty is what Bart is likely to become if certain things don't change. They're the same person essentially in different decades. Both are the underperforming sons of authority figures who don't fully approve of them. Bart's relationship with Homer is the running heart of the show. The love is real, and the gap between them is real. Homer doesn't quite understand Bart, doesn't quite know what to do with him, expresses pride in awkward and insufficient ways. He manages it through bluster and through occasional grand gestures that don't quite compensate for the consistent daily absence of knowing who his son actually is. Krusty's father is Rabbi Hyman Kristofsky, and Season 3, Episode 6, Like Father, Like Clown, which aired October 24th, 1991, is one of the great Simpsons episodes precisely because it gives this backstory the weight it deserves. Rabbi Kristofsky wanted his son to follow him into the rabbinate. Krusty Schaff born Herschel Pinchas Yerucham. Kristofsky, a name the show deploys for maximum effect, wanted to be a clown. His father considered it beneath the family. A performance career, a life of pratfalls and children's entertainment was not what the rabbi raised his son for. So Krusty made his choice, and his father disowned him. They didn't speak for years. That gap, the father who wanted something else and the son who became something else anyway, and the years of silence between them is the template that underlies both of them. Krusty lived it out into middle age. Bart is living the early chapters of it now. What Lisa and Bart eventually do in Like Father, Like Clown, reuniting Krusty and his father with a series of Talmudic quotations that Rabbi Kristofsky can't argue with, is genuinely sweet. The reconciliation lands emotionally, but the episode's real weight is in what it reveals about Krusty. He's been performing for decades, partly because he loves it, and partly because performing is the only identity he was ever given in the world outside his father's house. The clown is the cage, just like Ned's cheerfulness. It's the thing that replaced the thing he couldn't have. And the performing, once it becomes the cage, becomes difficult to leave. Krusty's relationship to his own career is not that of a man who loves what he does. It's the relationship of someone who has forgotten how to be anything else. The evidence accumulates across the series. Season 1, Episode 12, Krusty gets busted. Sideshow Bob frames Krusty for armed robbery and he goes to prison. Krusty doesn't fight it very hard, he just sort of capitulates, which reads, "If you're watching closely, less like guilt and more like a man who expected at some point to be punished and is just relieved it finally happened." Season 4, Episode 15, Krusty gets canceled. Krusty is pushed off the air by a novelty character and loses everything. He's genuinely broken by it. Not because the money's gone, but because without the performance, he doesn't know who he is. The show is his identity the way the bad kid is Bart's identity. Remove it, and there's a person standing there who has forgotten how to be themselves. There's also the history of Krusty's self-destruction, the gambling, the financial mismanagement, the tax evasion that appears in Season 1, the various addictions and disasters the show drops in as jokes, but which accumulate over time into a portrait of someone coping very badly with the specific pressures of a performance career built on a childhood wound. Krusty is funny when he's being a terrible clown. He's considerably more interesting when you notice that he's a talented performer who hates his audience, who has never resolved his relationship with his father, who built his entire identity on being the thing his rabbi father disapproved of, and who is now 60 years old and doesn't know who he'd be without the grease paint. Here's the moment that makes the theory explicit for me. There's a scene in Like Father, Like Clown, where Krusty talks to Bart about his father. He's not performing, he's not doing a bit, he's sitting quietly and talking about what it cost him. And Bart listens in a way that's different from how Bart usually listens. He's not bored. He's not looking for an angle. He's genuinely attending to what's being said because what's being said is resonating with something in him that he doesn't have words for yet. Bart worships Krusty the entertainer, but what holds him, what has always held him, is Krusty, the man who made his choice and lived with it and kept going. The man who became the bad son and built a life out of that identity and survived. From the outside, that looks like failure. From where Bart is standing, it looks like a template. And the tragedy, if it is one, isn't that Bart might become Krusty. It's that Bart might become Krusty and not notice that he's there. Krusty doesn't seem to fully notice that he's there. He just keeps making the show. He just keeps being funny. He drinks and gambles, and his makeup is always slightly wrong, and his heart isn't in it, and his father's dead now, and they reconciled eventually, and he's glad about that, but the grief is still there. And every morning he paints on the face. That's a very specific kind of man. The show built him over 35 years, gag by gag, and if you look at the whole shape of it, it's not a caricature. it's a warning. And the warning is addressed to a 10-year-old boy who watches Krusty every morning before school and thinks he's looking at a hero. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the quietest character in the show. There's one more angle to the Krusty/Bart parallel that I want to touch on, and it's specifically about the audience. Krusty performs for children. His television show is aimed at kids. The pratfalls, the itchy and scratchy segments, the product tie-ins, the entire apparatus of the Krusty. The clown show is designed to be consumed by people who are too young to notice the seams. And the seams are considerable. Krusty is clearly hungover at times. The show's production values decline and then get propped back up by corporate intervention. The merchandise is often terrible. The content is frequently inappropriate for its stated audience. Krusty is, in the language of a later era, giving the minimum viable effort. And the children don't notice. Or they notice and don't care because children are better at loving things despite their limitations than adults are. Bart notices in a sense. He's seen Krusty's failures up close and he's defended him anyway. But the children in Springfield who watch the show just watch the show. This creates an interesting mirror for how the show depicts its own audience. The Simpsons was, famously, a show that adults and children watched simultaneously in the 1990s, getting different things out of it. Adults noticed the political satire and the adult reference jokes tucked into the corners. Children noticed Bart and the slapstick and the attitude. Both groups were watching something that contained both of those things at once. Krusty is a version of that. A show that runs on two levels, the performance that children accept, and the man underneath it that the adults in the room can see. Bart occupies both positions simultaneously, which is one of the things that makes him interesting. He's a child who watches Krusty as a child does, with devotion, with acceptance, with a willingness to believe in the performance. But he's also, occasionally, the audience member who can see the man, who has seen the man, who loves both versions. And the question the theory poses, the uncomfortable extension of the Krusty as Bart's future reading, is whether Bart, when he grows up, will be the kind of adult who performs for an audience of children, while the adults in the room can see what's underneath, and whether he'll have made peace with that. Whether he'll find, as Krusty found, that performing for people who accept you without reservation is its own kind of sustaining thing, even when you know the acceptance is for the performance and not the person. Some people do make peace with that. Some people find it enough. The show leaves Bart's outcome open, deliberately, structurally, because he's always 10. But the mirror is there, and it's been there since the first time Bart turned on the television and found someone he recognized. There's also the sideshow Bob dimension of the Krusty story, which connects back to Bart in an interesting way. Bob, Kelsey Grammer, or is introduced as Krusty's sidekick and recurring nemesis. He frames Krusty, frames Bart, becomes the show's defining recurring villain across multiple seasons. And what's interesting about the Krusty sideshow Bob-Bart triangle is that Bob is, in his way, also a performance. He's a classically trained actor doing children's television because it was the available gig, and the suppressed rage underneath, the repeated attempts to murder a 10-year-old, the operatic villainy, is the show's joke about what happens when an intelligent, aesthetically refined person is permanently trapped below their own estimation of themselves. Bob is Krusty's mirror in the way Krusty is Bart's mirror. If Krusty is what Bart becomes when the performance becomes the person, Bob is what Krusty becomes when the performance breaks down completely and the person underneath turns murderous. The chain runs Bob, Krusty, Bart. Three men defined by their performances, trapped in roles they either chose or were assigned, circling the same drain in different decades. Bart is the most alive version of this. He still has choices the other two don't. That's what makes watching him interesting even now. The performance hasn't set yet. The clay is still warm. And sometimes, in the moments the show bothers to look closely, you can see the curious 5-year-old underneath the persona, still there, still asking questions. What he does with that is the show's longest-running open question, and the show will never answer it because answering it would require Bart to grow up. And there's a final detail about the Krusty/Bart relationship that I find quietly moving, and that I don't think the show intends as a theory. It's just there if you look for it. Krusty, across the run of the show, gets very few genuine fans. He has viewers. He has market share when the ratings are good. He has the commercial relationship with the children of Springfield that keeps the show on the air. But the person who believes in him, who has consistently, stubbornly, irrationally believed in him across decades of documented failure and personal disaster, is Bart Simpson, and Krusty knows this. There are moments where the show lets Krusty acknowledge it, usually in the register of awkward, deflecting embarrassment that adults use when children's devotion catches them off guard. He doesn't quite know what to do with Bart's belief. He hasn't earned it, and he knows it. But the fact of it matters to him in a way he can't articulate, and the show doesn't ask him to. Someone believes in you when you don't believe in yourself. When the audience has stopped showing up and the network is breathing down your neck and the grease paint is heavy and the jokes aren't landing, someone still believes that someone is 10 years old and he shouldn't be up this late, but he's watching anyway. The devotion runs both ways. It just expresses differently depending on which direction you're looking. Maggie Simpson does not speak. Across the entire run of the show, every season, every episode, she has produced one canonical spoken word. One. It was in Season 3, Episode 24, and Maggie makes 3, and it was voiced by Elizabeth Taylor, and the word was daddy. That's it. That's the full inventory of Maggie's documented verbal output. Before I get into what that might mean, I want to note the context of that single word. And Maggie Makes 3 is the episode, aired January 22nd, 1995, where Homer explains why he doesn't have any photos of Maggie in the family photo album. The answer is that Homer, when Maggie was born, had just quit the nuclear plant to pursue his dream of working at the local bowling alley. He was happy. He had everything he wanted. Then Marge announced she was pregnant with Maggie, and he had to go back to Mr. Burns and beg for his old job back. Burns, delighted by the humiliation, had a new plaque installed above Homer's workstation. Don't forget, you're here forever. A reminder, permanent and official, of why Homer returned and what he gave up. Every day, Homer looks at this sign. Every day it tells him the same thing. Then Maggie was born, and Homer solved the problem simply and without telling anyone about it. He covered certain letters of the sign with Maggie's photos. The sign now reads, "Do it for her." That's the context for Maggie's one word. The word is spoken at the end of an episode about a man who subordinated his own happiness to a child, who covered the evidence of his sacrifice with her face, who made it the first thing he saw every morning at work. And her word, her one word, her entire vocabulary, is daddy. The word is earned in a way that most emotional television moments aren't. But let's talk about what else Maggie has done, because the silence isn't the only interesting thing about her. She escaped from a nightmarish daycare run by a tyrant in Season 4, Episode 2, A Streetcar Named Marge. The daycare, the Ayn Rand School for Tots, which is a gag that rewards attention. Ayn Rand's philosophy famously prized self-interest and rejected communal behavior, operated on the principle that babies were to be silenced and controlled, confiscating pacifiers and generally managing the infants with military efficiency. The show's visual reference here is The Great Escape. The babies are prisoners, Maggie is Steve McQueen, and she organizes the escape. She coordinates the other babies. She gets the pacifiers back. She does this before she could walk consistently and without anyone outside the daycare noticing it had happened. She saved Homer from drowning. She shot Mr. Burns. Season 6, Episode 25, Who Shot Mr. Burns, Part 1. Burns enacts a plan to block out the sun and destroy everyone's livelihood and is shot in the season finale. The shooter is revealed in Season 7, Episode 1 as Maggie. Burns himself, regaining consciousness, points to the letters M and S on a Scrabble board, and the show's official explanation is that Maggie was grabbing for a candy Burns had, his gun was in the holster, and it went off. an accident. But Burns's holster was shown as empty before the shooting. He'd put the gun away. Maggie reached into a secured holster and fired it. And the episode's shot of Maggie, a baby with a gun in the park at night, alone, is framed with the specific gravity of a moment the show has decided to take seriously. The show also had a brief period where it dropped hints about Maggie's intelligence through things she draws, music she plays by ear, and her general orientation to the world around her. She's presented in these moments as someone taking everything in very carefully and choosing what to do with the information rather than acting on every impulse, which is notably the exact opposite of everyone else in her family. The pacifier is the central image here, and I want to linger on it for a moment because I think it's doing more work than it looks like. A pacifier is designed to suppress sound. It is quite literally a device for keeping the quiet in, for managing an infant's need to communicate without producing speech. Maggie has had one in her mouth for 35 years of television. She is never without it. And the silence that the pacifier maintains has allowed everyone around her, Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Springfield at large, to treat her as a background figure, a prop almost, the baby in the corner of every scene. The theory is that Maggie is not silent because she has nothing to say. She's silent because she's watching. In a household of people who are perpetually talking past each other, Homer demanding, Marge managing, Bart performing, Lisa analyzing, there is a fourth child who has been in the room for every argument, every disaster, every collapse and recovery, every lie and reconciliation and failed plan. She has been present, wide-eyed for all of it, and she has never once added to the noise. What she's been doing instead is paying attention. The daycare escape suggests strategic intelligence, the ability to assess a situation, identify the problem, organize a response, and execute a plan across multiple actors. These are not typical infant behaviors. They're the behaviors of someone who is very capable and has decided, for reasons of their own, not to demonstrate this in the context where it might be noticed and commented on. The most intelligent person in the room is often the one who says the least, not because they have nothing to contribute, because they've already processed the situation and reached a conclusion and are waiting for everyone else to catch up. That's a particular kind of personality, and it's recognizable, and the show has been depicting it in a yellow baby for 3.5 decades without ever quite naming it. There's something peaceful about Maggie, actually. In a household of people perpetually generating noise and drama and consequence, there's a baby in the corner who takes it all in and doesn't add to it. That might be the wisest thing anyone in that house has ever done, and she has one word for one person, saved for the right moment. Daddy, not Mummy, not Lisa's name, not even her own name. The word she chose, the one time she opened her mouth in the canonical run of the show, was a word of recognition and connection, directed at the person who put her photo on his wall and covered his humiliation with her face and built his entire daily professional existence around keeping her safe. That's a lot of intelligence to pack into one syllable. But then Maggie always was efficient. And one more observation worth making before we leave Maggie behind. Of all the characters in the show, she's the only one whose story has no visible damage yet. Homer has the crayon and the sacrifice potential. Ned has the cage. Lisa has the depression. Bart has Miss Mellon. Marge has the unlived life. Even Krusty has his rabbi father and his decades of managed dissolution. Maggie has years of watching, a gun she may or may not have fired intentionally, and one word she gave to one person at the right moment. Whether the show ever intends to return on that investment, whether Maggie will ever be given her full due, is an open question. But for now, she sits in the corner of every frame, wide-eyed and quiet, taking notes on a family that has no idea how closely it's being observed. There's a Treehouse of Horror segment, specifically Treehouse of Horror 5, Season 6, where Maggie bites Homer's hand in a parody of The Shining. It's a gag. It's supposed to be funny. But in the context of the genius theory, it's also the show giving Maggie something to do in a high-stakes scenario that makes complete logical sense. Recognizing the threat, responding to it using the limited tools available to her. Across the canonical episodes, there are a handful of other moments where Maggie's responses to situations are more appropriate than most adults in the room. Season 4, Episode 11, Homer's Triple Bypass. When Homer is in hospital and the family is frightened, Maggie's distress is depicted with specific detail. She understands what's happening. She's not crying because she's a baby and babies cry. She's crying because she loves her father, and her father is in danger, and she knows this clearly. That might sound like a small distinction. But across the run of the show, the difference between Maggie understanding things and Maggie simply reacting to them is maintained with more consistency than you'd expect from a character who never speaks. The other element of the genius theory that doesn't get discussed enough is what Maggie is doing with all the information she accumulates. She's been in the room for the entire run of this family's history. She's heard the arguments and the reconciliations, the money troubles and the small triumphs, the things Homer said when he thought nobody was listening, and the things Marge didn't say but showed anyway. She has, in some sense, the most complete record of this family of anyone in it. And she said nothing. There's a reading of this that's sinister. The silent child in the corner who knows everything and waits. But I don't think that's the right rating. The more human reading is that Maggie has, quite sensibly, decided that the noise level in this house is already high enough. That adding her voice to the mix would not improve anything. That her best contribution to this particular household at this particular time is watchful presence. She's not withholding. She's curating, waiting for the moment when a word will mean something, when adding to the noise will actually help rather than just add. She's already used the word once. It was right. The timing was right. The recipient was right. That's a very specific kind of intelligence. The intelligence that knows when to speak and when to be quiet. And it's in short supply in Springfield. One more thing about Maggie and the family dynamic that I find genuinely striking. Homer's relationship with his children across the run of the show has a specific emotional topology. He and Bart have the combative love, the strangling, the exasperation, the moments of pride that come out wrong. He and Lisa have the love across a gap. He can't quite reach her and he knows it. And the letter from the crayon episode is the fullest expression of what that gap costs him. And then there's Maggie. Homer's relationship with Maggie is, by design, the most unguarded. She can't argue with him. She can't be disappointed in him in the way that Lisa is disappointed in him. She can't wound him with words. She just exists in his vicinity, demanding nothing except to be held. And Homer, who is often defended and defensive and performing his own version of himself around his older children, is completely open with Maggie. The moment in And Maggie Makes 3, where he covers the "Don't forget, you're here forever" sign with her photos, is the most emotionally exposed Homer ever gets in the entire run of the show. He didn't tell anyone he did this. It's a private thing between him and the sign and the photos. He didn't tell Marge or Bart or Lisa. He just did it quietly and then went back to work. Maggie saw him do it. She was there. And she kept the secret in the specific way that people keep secrets they weren't told to keep, by simply never mentioning it, by having one word ready for the right moment. Daddy. That word knew what it was for. And the fact that it waited until the episode where Homer's secret finally got told, that's not accidental writing. That's the show understanding precisely what that relationship was. Now, let's talk about the bit that everyone brings up at dinner parties. The Simpsons predicts the future. You've heard this. You've probably said it. It comes up every time something in the news rhymes with something that happened in a 25-year-old episode, and the internet briefly convulses with screenshots, and they knew, in a general sense, that the Yellow family has some privileged access to information the rest of us don't. And to be fair to the claim, some of what the show got right is remarkable. Season 11, Episode 17. Bart to the Future, aired March 19, 2000. The episode depicts a future in which Lisa has become President of the United States and is dealing with a financial mess left by her predecessor, referred to in the episode as President Trump. This was 16 years before Donald Trump won the 2016 election, and 11 years before he began publicly testing the idea on The Apprentice. The show named him by name in the context of a disastrous former presidency. In the year 2000, Season 10, Episode 5, When You Dish Upon a Star, from 1998. In a background gag, a throwaway joke in the corner of a frame, a studio building is shown with a sign that reads, 20th Century Fox, a division of Walt Disney Company. 21 years later, in 2019, the Disney-Fox acquisition was completed. The sign was accurate. It was just early. The show also depicted, at various points before they happened, video calling technology, smartwatches, a three-eyed fish near a nuclear plant. A real three-eyed fish was discovered near a nuclear facility in Argentina in 2011. A faulty electronic voting machine that switches a vote to the wrong candidate. Season 8, Episode 2, aired in 1996, and the FIFA corruption scandal. The show's treatment of football governance corruption in a 2014 episode preceded the FBI indictments of FIFA officials by about a year. There's also the one about Higgs bosons in Season 10, Episode 2, The Wizard of Evergreen Terrace. Homer writes a physics equation on a blackboard. Dr. Simon Singh, a physicist and author, noted in 2019 that the equation predicts a mass for the Higgs boson particle that is consistent with its discovery at CERN in 2012, 14 years after the episode aired. The show's writers consulted with physicist David Shiminovich on the sequence. The equation was real, and it was right. That's an impressive list. But here's the thing, the easy explanation, and the one most people who bring this up are implicitly offering, is some version of they knew. A mystical reading. The writers have the gift. The show is a prophecy. I find this unsatisfying, not because it's wrong exactly, but because it misses something considerably more interesting. Here's the alternative reading, and I think it's the right one. The Simpsons writing room has historically contained some of the most analytically capable people in American entertainment. We're talking Harvard graduates, Rhodes Scholars, people who studied mathematics and literature and philosophy, and then went into comedy because comedy was the thing they loved, and the other things were just the things they were good at. The show's golden era writers, and the people like Conan O'Brien, John Swartzwelder, Greg Daniels, David Merkin, were not just funny, they were diagnosticians, they read widely, they thought structurally about culture and power and money and politics. And they made jokes about the logical conclusions of present trends. That's what satire does. Satire doesn't predict the future in a mystical sense. Satire identifies the direction something is already pointing and follows it forward. It exaggerates the trajectory so the audience can see the destination before they arrive at it. The Trump prediction is the clearest example. Bart to the Future wasn't claiming Trump would be president. It was making a satirical argument about the cultural trajectory of American celebrity as power, followed to its logical conclusion. A famous businessman, famous for being famous, with a particular kind of braggadocio, becoming the president of an America that has confused entertainment with governance. The writer saw that trajectory in 2000. They named the endpoint, and then 16 years later, the real world arrived at it. That's not prophecy, that's accurate analysis. The Disney-Fox acquisition is similar. In 1998, the media consolidation trend was already visible and accelerating. The logic of corporate entertainment was pointing toward fewer, larger entities. Every major development in that direction over the previous decade pointed the same way. A writer who was paying attention to that trend might reasonably imagine, as a joke about Hollywood excess, a world in which everything eventually belonged to Disney. It was a caricature of a direction that already existed. The real world caught up. The Higgs boson equation is different and arguably more impressive because it wasn't satire. It was a writer working with a physicist to put something genuinely accurate in a background gag. The kind of detail that rewards obsessive attention more than any casual viewer would ever notice. The show did that kind of thing regularly, background signs, throwaway lines, incidental details that hold up under scrutiny. The writers were showing off to some extent, but the showing off required knowing things. Now here's the third explanation, which I find the most interesting. The show has been running since 1989. It's been watched by, conservatively, tens of millions of people across multiple generations. Its premises and images and jokes are so deeply embedded in the cultural memory of the English-speaking world that they have likely, in some small and diffuse ways, influenced the world they depict. Artists and engineers and entrepreneurs who grew up watching The Simpsons absorbed its visual language and its satirical premises. The show depicted smartwatches in season 6. The people who later designed smartwatches grew up watching The Simpsons. The visual vocabulary of what a wrist-mounted communication device might look like was already in their heads, placed there by a cartoon. Did the show predict the smartwatch, or did it help create the aesthetic template for people who later built one? That's an uncomfortable question to answer definitively, but it's worth asking. The things we imagine in vivid and specific detail and broadcast to millions of people over decades become part of the shared vocabulary of possibility. Some of those possibilities get built, partly because they were imagined so clearly. The show didn't predict the future, it modeled the future and helped build the culture that produced it. That's less mystical and considerably more interesting. And if you take the full body of the show's analytical work seriously, seasons of carefully observed satire from very smart, widely read people paying close attention to American culture, then the remarkable thing isn't the predictions. The remarkable thing is that the show was this accurate for this long. All those episodes of following things to their logical conclusions and then watching the world catch up. That's not prophecy. That's the most sustained act of cultural observation in the history of American television. There's a version of the predictions argument that goes in the other direction, and it's worth spending a moment with. For every remarkable prediction the show got right, there are dozens it got wrong. The future episodes, Lisa's Wedding from season 6, Future Drama from season 16, Holidays of Future Past from season 23. All depict versions of 2010 or 2013 or 2041 that look considerably different from how those years actually turned out. The predictions about technology, about politics, about the shape of daily life are often wildly inaccurate. And that's actually the more useful data point, because it tells you something about what kind of prediction making the show was doing. It wasn't systematic forecasting. It wasn't a research project, it was satire. And satire gets some things right by accident and gets most things wrong by design, because satire is about the present and uses the future as a projection surface. The things the show got right are the things the writers were genuinely analyzing. The cultural trajectories they had actually thought through. Trump is one, media consolidation is one, the Higgs boson is one because David Sheminovich genuinely consulted on the mathematics. The rest is pattern matching applied to an enormous corpus of episodes. The pattern matching is a cognitive shortcut, and it's one worth being skeptical about. We remember the hits and forget the misses because the misses don't generate screenshots. Nobody tweets. The Simpsons predicted that commercial space travel would be normalized by 1999, and they were wrong. The bias in the data is enormous, but here's the thing about all of this. Even accounting for the survivor bias and the base rate and the pattern matching shortcut, the Trump prediction is still remarkable. One specific name in one specific context in the year 2000. The Disney-Fox acquisition is still remarkable. 16 specific name predictions in Bart to the Future that map onto real events over 16 years is not a coincidence the law of large numbers fully explains. So the question is not, did they predict the future? The answer to that is sometimes. The question is how. And the answer I keep arriving at is because they were paying very close attention for a very long time to the direction things were already going. The Trump episode doesn't require mystical access to 2016. It requires someone in 2000 who understood what American celebrity culture was becoming, what the political appetite for it looked like, and was willing to follow that to a logical conclusion. That's the skill, not prophecy, observation. Extended, disciplined, relentless observation turned into jokes. Here's a prediction the show made that doesn't get discussed as often, and that I think is more interesting than most of the ones that do. In Season 2, Episode 14, Principal Charming, aired February 14th, 1991. There's a sequence where Homer is using a computer at work. The interface looks nothing like what computers actually looked like in 1991. It's clean, intuitive, designed for a non-technical user. The show was depicting a computing experience that wouldn't become mainstream for another 4 or 5 years. With the widespread adoption of graphical user interfaces and consumer internet access. This wasn't a prediction exactly, it was a creative choice made for legibility. The show needed Homer to use a computer in a way an audience could follow, so the writers and animators defaulted to something that made intuitive sense rather than something that accurately depicted the clunky command line interfaces of 1991. The prediction emerged from a design decision, and that's a useful frame for a lot of the show's accurate moments. They're predictions by default, cases where the show made a creative choice that served the immediate storytelling need, and the real world subsequently arrived at the same place for different reasons. The show imagined a usable computer interface because it needed one for a joke. Silicon Valley imagined usable computer interfaces because they were trying to build a product. The destination was the same. What the show was actually predicting in cases like this was what humans would eventually want. Because the show was made by humans for humans and was trying to depict human behavior in recognizable ways. And the things humans want tend to be fairly consistent across decades, even when the technology to deliver them changes dramatically. That's less mystical than prophecy and more interesting. The show was a map of human desire drawn repeatedly across decades. Some of those desires got built. We've covered a lot of ground tonight. A man who chose to stay dumb so the people he loved could keep him. A neighbor whose cheerfulness was a cage built when he was 6 years old by a behavioral psychologist in Minnesota. A girl who has been sad in the same key since 1990 and has never been given a proper resolution. A boy who became the bad kid before he had the language to argue against it. A woman with a blue tower of hair and a canvas in every room of her house, and a novel she wrote that her family didn't read. A man named Grimes who expected the world to be fair and found out it wasn't, and died finding out. A clown who is a warning. A baby who knows everything and has decided to keep it to herself. A writer's room full of very smart people who kept following things to their logical conclusions and then watched the world catch up. What I come back to after spending time with all of these theories is how much the show cares about its characters. That might sound like a simple observation. Of course, a long-running show cares about its characters. But The Simpsons is a show that has been running for 36 years. And the easy thing to do with a show that long is to let the characters become caricatures. To let the funny version replace the human one. To trade depth for laughs, because laughs are what keeps the machine running. And The Simpsons has done some of that. The show went through a long stretch, roughly seasons 9 through 14, give or take, where it was visibly less interested in who these characters were and more interested in what they could do as comedic vehicles. Homer became more cartoonish and less recognizable. Bart became less interesting, Marge became more functional and less felt. Anyone who watched the show across that whole run noticed the change. It was real, and it was frustrating. But the DNA of the early show, the emotional architecture that the writers built in the first 7 or 8 seasons, turned out to be more durable than anyone expected. It's still legible, it's still there. When you go looking for what's underneath, you find something that was put there on purpose. The characters were built well enough that they continued to reward examination even through the seasons that didn't treat them well. You can still trace Lisa's depression through episodes that didn't know they were about it. You can still see Ned's conditioning in episodes that played his cheerfulness purely for laughs. The architecture holds. The Simpsons was, at its best, a show about people who love each other imperfectly in a world that doesn't particularly reward that love. Homer puts a crayon back in his brain. Ned swallows decades of rage and calls his neighbor by a silly name. Lisa plays her saxophone in the dark and tries to find a language for something she can't explain. Bart performs the bad kid because nobody told him there was anything else to be. Marge paints when everyone's asleep because the creative impulse doesn't go away just because it stopped being the main thing, and in the corner of every scene, a baby watches all of it. She says nothing. She has one word in reserve for the right moment, for the right person. That, I think, is the most human thing the show ever did. Not the predictions, not the controversies, not the records it broke, or the cultural impact it had. The fact that they built a family complicated enough to theorize about for this long and still not fully understand. 788 episodes of people being imperfect and loving each other badly and getting up the next morning and trying again. Occasionally putting a crayon back in their brain because the world they know needs them to be a particular way and they care enough about the world to accommodate it. Something worth sitting with is the question of why these theories exist at all. Why The Simpsons generates them in a way that most shows don't. The answer, I think, is that the show was built on something genuine. The characters were created by people who cared about more than the jokes. Matt Groening drew a family that was visibly based on a real experience of American domestic life. The father who loves his family but isn't quite enough, the mother who holds everything together at personal cost, the difficult child, the gifted child, the baby who watches. These are types that people recognize because they lived in houses with them. And when you put real types into a long-running story and keep writing them honestly, or keep the early, honest writing durable enough that later seasons can't fully erase it, you get a body of work that sustains interpretation. The theories don't come from nowhere. They come from the show earning them, from writers who put something real in the corners of the frame and trusted that someone would look. All those episodes, all those years, a family that never ages, and a town that never changes, and a show that, underneath the gags and the celebrity cameos and the declining Rotten Tomatoes scores, has never stopped being about the thing it was always about. What it means to love imperfectly, what it costs to stay, what it takes to keep showing up for the people you've chosen or been assigned or stumbled into loving without quite planning to. That's the show. That's always been the show. And now it's late, and wherever you are, I hope you found somewhere comfortable. The light is on at 742 Evergreen Terrace. It's been on since 1989. Good night.